Ever feel like you're kind of navigating a world, well, a world that's orchestrated for someone else? Like, maybe your ideal volume is everyone else's like library voice.
Yeah.
Well, you might be part of a surprisingly large group. We're talking introverts. And today we're taking this deep dive into Susan Cain's Quiet, the power of introverts in a world that can't stop talking, to, uncover those strengths of this personality type that don't always get the spotlight.
Right.
Get this, Kate Cain drops this truth bomb right at the start. She says between a third and a half of Americans are introverts.
Oh,
So chances are this deep dive, it's not just for you, it's for like someone you know, someone you work with, maybe even someone you share a roof with, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is really about, not about putting yourself in a box or anything, but gaining a new perspective, a perspective that often gets drowned out because our world can be very extroverted.
Yeah.
It's about seeing the value in a different way of being,
Totally. And it reminds me of this conference I went to, right? And I had spent the morning prepping, solo, just me in my hotel room, getting in the zone. But by the time the actual event started, I was energized, I was talkative. People probably thought I was a total social butterfly. But in reality, I was just riding that wave of like solid alone time.
Interesting.
And it made me realize how much we misunderstand those quieter folks around us.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good illustration of how we sometimes confuse introversion with being shy or even, antisocial. And Cain does a great job at kind of dismantling these myths.
Let's ditch the stereotypes, right? Let's get to the heart of it. So how does Cain actually define what introversion is?
Yeah, she talks about it in terms of needing less external stimulation. And that's important, right? It's not about disliking people, but it's more about, where you find that sweet spot where you can really engage and focus your energy, which, let's be honest, isn't always the loudest room.
Right.
Right.
And this is important, too, because she makes a clear distinction, right, between being shy and being introverted. And I think, like you said, they show up together sometimes, but they're not the same thing at all.
Not at all, no.
Because shyness, that's more about that fear of judgment. Am I right?
Exactly, yeah. You can have someone who's introverted who can own the stage.
Right.
Total charisma. But you put them in, like, a networking event with forced small talk, and they might just practically disappear.
Yeah.
Think about, like, Barbra Streisand, right? Incredible performer, but also deals with stage fright. So it highlights that it's not about lacking personality or ambition.
Yeah.
It's just, where do you really shine?
It's about where you shine brightest.
Yeah.
Yeah. But haven't we all felt that pressure, though, to, like, be on all the time? Like, we're constantly supposed to be the life of the party. I don't know. It just makes you wonder, like, how did this whole extrovert ideal become, like, the gold standard?
Well, Cain traces it back to a few key historical shifts. And one of them is the rise of the self-help movement,
Okay.
It really put those, like, charismatic, sales-driven personalities on a pedestal.
Oh, tell us.
Like, think about Dale Carnegie going from a farm boy to, like, a legendary sales guru. It's like the ultimate transformation story, right?
Totally.
And along with that came a shift in advertising, too.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it wasn't enough to just have, a fantastic product. You needed a dazzling personality to sell it.
Right.
It became less about character and more about, charisma.
Like those old ads, like, are you self-conscious about your smile? Like, all that stuff. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
It really puts it into perspective, right? Like school, job interviews, even just scrolling through social media, we're bombarded with these messages that louder, bolder, more outgoing equals success.
Yeah, it's a cultural shift.
Yeah.
And Cain argues that this has had major implications for how we view introversion. But here's the thing, it's not just cultural. Cain dives into the world of biology, too, and she introduces this fascinating work of Dr. Jerome Kagan, who studied babies' reactions to different stimuli.
Hold on. So we're, like, labeling babies now.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It's not about putting babies in boxes. But his research highlighted these biological differences in temperament. He found that babies who were more reactive to stimulation, maybe startled by a loud noise more easily, they were statistically more likely to become introverted adults.
So you're telling me there's, like, a scientific reason why loud noises made me want to, like, hide under the table as a kid? Like, that wasn't just me being too sensitive.
Exactly. It's about, like, a different sensitivity setting. These high reactive kids, as he called them, they process information more deeply, and that influences how they interact with the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's actually really cool. So it's not good or bad, just different.
Exactly.
But if we're kind of wired this way, how do introverts thrive in a world that seems determined to make us louder? And Cain dives into that.
She does. She does. And that's where it gets really interesting.
So we've got like this biological basis for introversion, this high reactivity thing, but at the same time, we're living in a world that seems to reward the opposite.
It's a bit of a paradox, right?
Totally. So how do we like reconcile that? How do we make sense of that?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Cain tackles this head on. She challenges that assumption that introverts can't be effective leaders.
Right.
For example, she talks about Bill Gates.
Okay.
I mean, talk about quiet leadership at its finest.
Yeah, you don't get to be a tech titan without some serious leadership skills, right?
Exactly. And it's not just anecdotal either. The research actually backs this up. Studies show that introverted leaders can be incredibly effective, especially like when they're leading teams that are, proactive, that take initiative.
Interesting.
When you think about it, it makes sense, right? An introvert's tendency to listen, to reflect, to create space for other people's ideas, I mean, that can be incredibly powerful in a team setting.
Yeah, it's not about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about making space for those, like you said, the best ideas to kind of bubble up. And that actually reminds me of another one of Cain's examples, Rosa Parks.
Oh, yeah.
She was often described as timid, even shy, but also possessing this like courage of a lion. And her quiet strength, I mean, that was absolutely pivotal to like igniting the entire civil rights movement.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show you, right, that profound change can come from the most unexpected places.
Totally.
It really challenges us to rethink our definition of what leadership even means, right?
Yeah.
But it also begs the question, how can introverts navigate a world that isn't always so, accommodating to their needs?
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole sometimes,
Exactly. And that's where Cain brings up this idea of free trade agreements.
Okay.
So basically it's this idea that, we can make conscious choices to sort of stretch our natural tendencies, our personalities, when it's for something that's really important to us.
Okay, I think I get it, but can you give me an example? Like, how does this actually play out in real life?
Sure. Let's take the world of sales.
Okay.
Right? Often seen as like the extrovert's domain.
Right, totally.
But Cain talks about this one guy, a really successful salesman, who actually credits his success to being a great listener.
Interesting.
So instead of like dominating the conversation, he focuses on really understanding his client's needs. Asks thoughtful questions, creates a genuine connection.
So he's actually leveraging those like introverted strengths to his advantage. So it's not about becoming someone you're not, but figuring out how to like use those natural abilities in a way that, feels authentic.
Exactly. It's about strategy, right? It's about knowing your strengths and then figuring out, okay, how can I apply these, even in situations that might not feel, totally natural.
Right.
And that actually brings up a really important question for our listeners to think about. What are your core personal projects?
Yeah.
What are those goals that are so important to you that it's worth, stretching outside that comfort zone a little bit?
Yeah. And it's not just about our careers either, right?
Right.
Because Cain talks about how understanding introversion, like this whole concept, can even transform our relationships. Like think about those classic conflicts where, one partner's craving all the social interaction while the other one finds it completely draining.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cain uses this hilarious example, this couple, Greg and Emily. Greg loves dinner parties.
Okay.
Emily, not so much. She sees it as like Greg's spreading his energy around to everyone, whereas she prefers to focus her energy on him.
Oh, that's actually kind of sweet.
It is, in a way. But you can see how those different social styles, that could lead to some friction.
Totally, yeah.
Especially for introverts who, might not always be as vocal about what they need. It can really build up some resentment.
Yeah.
And Cain really emphasizes that communication is key here.
It's almost like saying, like, hey, I love you, but 5 dinner parties in a row is like my personal limit.
Exactly. Finding that compromise, where both partners feel heard, respected.
Oh.
And this extends to parenting, too.
Yeah.
Cain actually dedicates a whole chapter to this, how to cultivate quiet kids in a world that can't stop talking.
Which I think is so important because as a parent, it's so easy to internalize those societal expectations, right? Like if your kid is a little quieter, maybe prefers to, do their own thing, play alone, you start to wonder, like, is something wrong?
Right, exactly. Cain tells this story about this little boy, Ethan, whose parents actually took him to therapy because he wasn't as outgoing as the other kids.
Wow.
And the therapist basically told them he's totally fine. He's just wired differently.
He's just figuring things out in his own way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder, right? Kids, just like adults, we come in different flavors.
Totally.
And those differences, they're not just okay, they're valuable.
Absolutely.
We need to be encouraging those unique strengths, those passions, whether it's, reading, building elaborate Lego creations, whatever it might be.
Yes. And it's interesting because she connects this to the workplace too, right? Like the whole trend of open plan offices.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I get it. It's supposed to foster collaboration, but let's be real, it can feel like an introvert's worst nightmare.
Well, it's sensory overload. It's like being expected to, sprint a marathon without a break.
Yes, exactly. And Cain talks about the importance of creating what she calls restorative niches for introverted kids. Basically, these spaces where they can recharge, be themselves, without feeling that pressure to constantly, be on.
And it's so interesting because she connects this back to the workplace, right? Like, think about the whole open office plan trend.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Which, yeah, it's supposed to foster collaboration and all that, but it can be an introvert's worst nightmare.
Oh, absolutely. It's a prime example of how design can either support or hinder, different personality styles. And Cain really advocates for finding that balance, like you need that stimulation, but you also need those opportunities for solitude, those moments where introverts can really do their best work without feeling like they're constantly on stage.
And it's not even about special treatment for introverts, right? It's about recognizing that when we create environments that actually work for everyone, that's when we unlock this whole new level of creativity and innovation.
Exactly. It's about the value of diverse perspectives, right?
Yeah.
And that's where Cain's exploration of cultural values gets really interesting. For example, did you know that in many Eastern cultures, introversion is often seen as a strength?
Really? I had no idea. Tell me more about that.
Well, in a lot of Asian cultures, traits like humility, quiet persistence, deep thinking, those are highly prized qualities.
Wow.
And it really challenges those Western assumptions about what actually defines success, doesn't it?
It really makes you think, what if we stopped equating success with whoever's got the loudest voice in the room? What kind of potential could we unlock if we, created more space for those quieter strengths to really flourish?
Right. It really makes you think, what if we stopped equating success with whoever's got the loudest voice in the room?
Right.
What kind of potential could we unlock if we, created more space for those quieter strengths to really flourish?
Totally. And you know what's so cool? Cain doesn't just leave us with a philosophical question, right? She actually connects this back to some really real world stuff, especially when she talks about risk taking in financial markets.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this is where she gets into the 2008 financial crash, right?
Yeah.
How did this whole, culture of personality play into all of that?
Yeah, that's exactly what she digs into. She makes this really interesting argument that, this dominance of what she calls reward sensitive, those really extroverted personalities in places like, say, Wall Street. It played a big role in that whole crisis.
Interesting.
These were people driven by short-term gains.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were often overlooking potential risks just to chase that next reward.
Yeah. It's like that saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. But it's like when everyone around you is caught up in all the hype and excitement, it's hard to be that voice of caution,
Absolutely. And that's where Cain brings up someone like Warren Buffett, known for that quiet, analytical approach to investing.
Right.
It's not about the short game, right? It's about long-term value. It's about tuning out the noise and staying true to, as she calls it, your own inner scorecard.
It's like sometimes the most successful approach is the one that's not afraid to just not get caught up in all that hype, thinking differently, playing the long game.
Exactly. And that's what I find so compelling about Cain's work. It's not about saying, okay, this personality type is better than that one. It's about recognizing the value of both.
Right.
It's about creating a world where those differences are not just accepted, but celebrated.
It's about embracing the differences. So, for everyone listening out there, whether you're a diehard introvert, a proud extrovert, or, somewhere in between, what's the key takeaway? What do we do with all of this insightful information?
I think it's an invitation. It's an invitation to embrace those unique strengths that you bring to the table. It's an invitation to advocate for what you need and to challenge those outdated notions of what it means to be successful. And I think ultimately it's about recognizing that sometimes the quietest voices, they can spark the most profound change.
I love that. It's such a powerful message, and it's definitely one that resonates. So, if any of these ideas have piqued your interest, we highly encourage you to check out Quiet for yourselves. It's a deep dive worth taking.